Hi guys, this is Michelle Nicolaisen with Bombshell, and today I'm interviewing Erica Kosminsky. Is that how you say it?
Correct.
So can we start off, and we're going to talk about a couple different things as far as contractors and employees and the legality of it, and also a little bit more of the philosophical mindset sort of behind bringing people into your business and how you can do that the right way and how you can do that the wrong way. Erica, can you tell us a little bit more about like who you are and what you do, your business name, and where we can find you on the internet?
All right. My business name is The Invisible Office, and we kind of went with that name because, well, first of all, because most of the businesses that I work with are virtual, and so they're sort of invisible. And the secondary side of that is even with the brick and mortar offices that I work with, you kind of want your interior structure veiled from the public. You don't want them to have to see everything that goes on behind the scenes. Like, for example, I work at a library on Sundays, and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes on at the library that people outside that just come in and check in books, they don't have any idea about all that kind of extra background stuff that goes on, like budget wise and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we decided to go with the name The Invisible Office. I live in Tennessee, and my specialty in HR is U.S. federal compliance. So I work with things like making sure that quarterly tax employment stuff is turned in on time and paperwork and like the I-9 and those kind of things, because those are the big items that most people overlook, and then later it comes back to kick them in the butt because they get huge fines, plus they have to pay their employees or their contractors huge sums of money because they were doing things incorrectly.
Okay, cool. So to start off, can you talk a little bit about like some of the more common mistakes that you see people in like the online business field making when it comes to those kind of things, and like what we can do to fix them to make sure that we're on the right side of the law?
A lot of times, and this is sad for me to say, but more of my clients are people that are contacting me after they've been contacted by the Department of Labor or after they've actually been sued by someone who was working for them, and they're all of a sudden realizing that they're going to have thousands upon thousands of dollars in fines. The biggest one, and this one is very complicated for most people that have no HR experience, is the I-9. It is the paper that tells the employer that the person that is working for them is a U.S. citizen. It doesn't matter if you have someone that's foreign working for you as long as they have a green card. So all you have to do is make a copy of it. There's certain things on there. You fill it out with the employee name. You make a copy of their license. You make a copy of their social security card. If you've ever had a job anywhere, you know when you come in, they ask you to bring those two or three documents. They give you some options.
Yeah.
So like column 3 on that document says if the person is a foreigner, then you have to document something else, or the green card, something so that you know that you have covered your butt, saying that you tried to make sure they were legal to work for you.
Yeah.
A lot of small businesses, coffee shops, places that only have 5 or 6 employees, don't bother with the I-9. The problem is that ICE, the internal, customs and that kind of thing, they view employees differently than the IRS does. And so a lot of times they'll get into this issue where say that you work with like IT contractors. They work for you 40 hours a week every week. ICE expects you to have a copy of an I-9 on file for that contractor.
Yeah.
The fine for not having that single sheet of paper on file somewhere, doesn't even matter if it's a digital copy. You can have it scanned in as long as you can provide it to the ICE agent. It's $3,200 a copy.
Wow.
Even if they're legal, just not having it on file. The fines, if the person is illegal and you did nothing to find that out, then the fines start at $10,000 a piece.
Wow.
So they, say you have 6 employees, that's still a hefty fine, because if you've only got 6 employees, you're probably a really small firm.
Yeah.
Abercrombie Fitch, back about I think it was actually in 2009, they got hit with like $23 million in fines over not having this document because they had so many part-time employees. They weren't filing the documentation right. They were doing it when they were hiring the people, but they weren't keeping it on file.
Yeah.
So they couldn't prove that they had done it.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of like these little bitty paperwork things. Or the other thing that I get a lot of issues with is people don't understand the difference between contractors and employees. And so they think, oh, I'm a virtual business, I'm just going to hire somebody. And then they make the 3 or 4 fatal mistakes that can be made between the difference in a contractor and employee. The instant you set hours for somebody, you say that they have to work 9 to 5 or they have to be available from 9 to 5, they're an employee. The instant that you give someone equipment, say that, and this is an issue that I have a really good friend who's an IT contractor. I keep telling him he's not a contractor, he's an employee. They set his hours, they provide him equipment, he has a laptop and a tablet and all this different equipment. If you provide the person equipment, they're an employee. They're instantly an employee. And those are the 2 main things that people don't look out for. And so, like say with what you do, people give you tasks. And so you do your task, you do it whenever, even if you say, okay, I'm going to have it done within a week. That's fine, you're a contractor.
Yeah.
If they say, I need you to work on this from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock today, you're instantly an employee, and they're breaking the law.
Yeah, well, and I think that because I was talking with a friend about this when there was, the post that you were quoted in that Alana wrote about a couple of, like, A-list people who had done ads that were for employees, but they were calling them contractors. And I feel like it's probably a really common misconception because my friend that I was talking to didn't realize it, but, like, I think a lot of people think that employee versus contractor is a distinction that's made internally inside the business. And it turns out it's actually not. Like, somebody else makes those rules, and if it doesn't matter if you're calling someone a contractor if they're legally an employee because of rules that were set outside of that, right?
Right. And that was one thing that I mentioned in that post, in that comment that I made with Alana, was that a lot of people use what they call an independent contractor agreement. And if you are working with contractors, you need to have this agreement. It usually involves an NDA. It involves the scope of each project. And the one key giveaway that you're working with a contractor is that they can leave between each project. So say let's consider my newsletter as a project. So my VA is a contractor. If she decided that she was going to go off and do something else like knit squid or whatever, between each newsletter, she is able to leave the contract with no issues.
Yeah.
So if within that independent contractor agreement, they put in there, we want you to work 9 to 5, we know that is an employment issue, and we want you to suspend that right in order to work for us. Your contractor now has a legally signed document that says you knew you were breaking the law.
Yeah.
And you would not believe how often that I come across these, and especially the IRS is like, it says here in this document you did it, and they bring me and they have these documents, and I'll sit down with them, and because I'm a mediator as well, so sometimes I'll sit down and they'll want me to mediate it out, and I'll be like, people, you broke the law, and right here you said you knew you were doing it.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing that you see like on YouTube, where there'll be a clip from a video, and then down below it'll be say whatever this clip belongs to, Miramax or wherever, no copyright infringement intended. That line right there, more people get sued and get fined for that line, no copyright infringement intended, because that right there, they acknowledge that they were breaking the law. They knew they were doing it, and they acknowledged it. And so that's the thing about using a standard independent contractor agreement and not adding any of those clauses in, not ever saying that we want you to suspend such and such right, because as soon as you do, your fines, in some instances, the fines triple.
Oh, wow.
And you can very easily get in, like one of the clients that I was working with last year, they were a very small, like mom and pop style grocery store in the state of Kentucky. The Department of Labor got onto them, and it ended up, they only had like 8 employees, and one of their employees had worked for them for probably 20 years. Yeah. The employees were not the ones bringing the suit. They loved the people. The Department of Labor and ICE and then the IRS got involved. They had almost $180,000 in fines. And of course, then this little grocery store shuts down because these people didn't have $180,000, but they had multiple times had acknowledged that they were doing things in a kind of under-the-table, backhanded way to save money, not to pay taxes, and all this different stuff. And, if you ever acknowledge that you're breaking the law, you're in so much deeper than if you had just went along and pretended you didn't know, which is horrible to say, but that is, you have to be careful about things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and one of the other things that's kind of a segue into like what we wanted the second half of the interview to be about is that one of the other things we were talking, and you've talked about this before, and you had a really great post on She Owns It, about, I think it was like why I hate the word assistant, something like that.
Yeah, why I hate the word VA.
Yeah.
The virtual assistant, that... You were making a point. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's okay. No, yeah, but I think it's interesting that you kind of have that side of your work too, because I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to things like delegating and hiring, really only cover like the legal and the logistical side of things. And one of the things that we talked about previously that I think is a really interesting conversation is that as business owners kind of like at the forefront of this next generation of business, I feel like we have not only like the option but a responsibility to stop working in some of the more broken like hiring and employment paradigms. Right. And one of the things we had talked about, that there was the discussion around the post that Alana wrote, which I'll link to in the blog post, and I don't feel like this is even about any particular person, because I've seen this sort of phrasing literally across like 5 or 6 different ads, but they'll say that they don't want someone who's looking for a side hustle, or like they don't want someone who runs their own business. And I feel like I personally, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Like I personally feel like that's kind of indicative of like the old school broken mentality, because it's like if you're like not, I don't think necessarily that everyone is cut out to be a business owner, and like I'm fine with that. There are people who are going to be employees, but I feel like we're moving towards a much more like independent business oriented model of the economy instead of like just business owners and employees. And so if you're wanting to hire someone as a contractor, even though your ad makes it sound like they're actually an employee, and
right.
You're saying that you don't want them to have like an entrepreneur mindset, that to me that just seems really weird, because I don't understand where that comes from.
See, and I agree. And from a legal standpoint, to a degree, for a person to be a contractor, for the IRS's in the IRS's eyes, that person should have a business license. Mm-hmm. The very second you tell someone that has a business license that they can't have a business, you're opening yourself up, and you suddenly realize, oh, if you think about it that way, that person's an idiot.
Yeah.
You can't tell somebody, oh, you have to have a business license, but you can't have a business.
Yeah. We don't want you to be working with other clients, things like that.
It's people like that are they're trying to work their way around the law. And you can't and a lot of businesses now, like you used to have a bunch of big corporate companies, like I'm trying to think of, I used to work for a bank. Mm-hmm. And this bank that I worked for, when you'd hire in, they would tell you, if you want to have a second or third job or a side business, you have to have it approved with management. Mm-hmm. A lot of companies are now not saying that because it's illegal. You can't tell somebody they can't have a second job. Yeah. You can't tell somebody they can't have a side business. You get into this whole kind of, when I think about this, I always think about back in like the early 1700s, when there were people that came from like England and France, where they came to the U.S. and they were, what do they call it, the indentured servitude. Yeah. Where they were, so you can't basically tell people that you own them for whatever period of time. You can't do it. There were so many laws over slavery and different things that come into that, and people don't realize how many laws they break when they start saying you can't have a second job, you can't have a side hustle, you can't. Yeah. First of all, in my mind, it's wrong. You can't tell people that. Second of all, you're breaking the law. And a lot of these people, this is the other side of what I was going to say a minute ago. Contractors, a lot of times it seems that people think, oh, I can hire a contractor and I don't have to pay them minimum wage. Wrong. That's really wrong. And that's like, there's a lot of those companies like that I've worked with in these, we'll find out they were paying the people like $6.50 an hour, and so part of their settlements comes in where they also have to pay back wages to all these people that worked for them. because they weren't paying them a minimum wage.
Yeah.
And the math on that is just crazy. Like trying to figure out like 20 years of, of back pay, half an hour at a time. It's just insane. But the minimum wage is a big deal. And the other thing, and I'm going to say this probably isn't where I should say in this interview, but the other side, and people get kind of skirt around this issue trying to get around the law. Interns. People all the time are trying, I'm going to hire an intern.
Yeah.
An intern is an employee. The only difference between an intern and a regular employee is the fact that they work on a temporary or on a certain time frame.
Yeah.
And so the only way that you can get away with not paying an intern is if their university requires them to do an unpaid internship and they're earning credit for it. If you have an unpaid intern working in your office that is not related to a university, you're breaking the law.
The intern thing, I agree with that too, because there's been a couple of things where I'll see in groups of business women, like these are not necessarily, I think I have seen one or two of these sorts of discussions or suggestions in public, but like in private Facebook groups, someone's like, oh, well, I need an assistant, but I can't really afford an assistant, and inevitably someone throws out, oh, hire an intern, and it's like, that always gets under my skin, because it's just like that's not going to be an arrangement. If that's the mindset you're going in, well, I really need an assistant, but I can't hire an assistant, so I'm going to get somebody else to do my grunt work and not pay them. Like that's
right.
That's not a good mindset. That you're not going in with a mindset of like, how can both of us get the most out of this? You're going on in this mindset with like, okay, well, and the whole point of an internship, unpaid or not, because most of them that are paid are not super well paid, but the whole point is that they're learning something. So unless you're like actively going out of your way to make sure that they're learning like a huge amount of stuff, then like you're just blatantly taking advantage of someone.
Right. And a lot of people use that, like you were saying, they're like, oh, I need an assistant. Most interns, like especially if you go through a university, communications and advertising and marketing and maybe engineering will be some of the ones that will offer internships, because they're expecting you to pull that person in and actually have them working on advertising projects, not as an assistant, not collating paper, not getting coffee. Yeah. If they're not doing things within their major, communications or graphics or whatever their major is, they're not earning their credit. And I've dealt with that. I have a university here locally that I work with, and a lot of times they will have the people come in and they'll be like, oh, well, what were you doing during your internship? And these people will have to go back and redo their internships because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
It's like my younger sister, she's almost 10 years younger than me, and she's in pharmacy school right now, or she started in pharmacy school. She's not in pharmacy school now, but she had to do a pharmacy internship. And so imagine if she had gone in and instead of working with a pharmacist, she had been in the office doing paperwork or, that kind of thing. She would not have gotten her internship credit because she was not learning what she was supposed to be learning. Yeah. And that's the problem, is that these internships have become, people think of them in too generalized of a manner when in reality they were created for educational purposes.
Yeah. Well, and I know there's kind of a larger discussion about internships and ethics in general. Like, I know a couple years ago, like, fashion is one of my big background/side things, things that I'm interested in. And a couple years ago, there was a huge discussion, like, in the fashion community, and it, like, wound up in a couple of the major papers about whether, whether the idea of internships, and I don't know if this regularly comes up in other industries too, but in fashion, it's like if you're going, you need to take at least one unpaid internship to get jobs. Like that's considered the industry standard, is that you're going to wind up working unpaid like 40 or 60 hours a week at an internship for at least a couple of months. And there's this whole discussion of like, well, is this going to wind up biting the industry in the ass and like actually, kind of just making it stale? Because the thing is that there's only there's not going to be a whole lot of people who are going to be able to do that, and the kinds of people, like that's automatically limiting your potential internship field to people who have a very particular kind of lifestyle and come from a very particular background. And when you're working in an industry that's as much about creativity and art as anything else, like eventually that's going to make things stale. Like you're not bringing in fresh blood. So
Right. I know that I have a ton of hobbies. I'm one of those people that have very eclectic tastes, but one of the things that I do kind of on the side is I sing opera.
Uh-huh.
And I've noticed that a lot of the symphonies used to, when I was a little kid, or when I was dreaming about doing, opera or whatever when I was little, you used to see people that would go into opera houses or go into symphonies or whatever, and they would work for free. They
Yeah.
would do their internships and their apprenticeships and whatever for free. And I know that in the arts communities, there have been a lot of crackdown on that, because now, like our local symphony here, the Nashville Symphony, they offer, when you do an internship with them, they offer housing, they pay you, they have all these different things that you get, and you may not be making as much money as you would if you were like a real, full-fledged opera singer, but they have all these little perks and stuff they throw in there,
Yeah.
and especially like the housing, because some people will be coming from different areas to work on it. And so they have all those different things that they give you. So say you're on an internship, you're only making $7 an hour, then you don't have to worry about losing your house because you're living in their housing.
Yeah.
Which I think is one thing. And and the other side of that was like ballet schools. People used to dream about being ballerinas. Well, there was so many. It was so hard to get in, because used to, people would go in and they'd do these internships or apprenticeships or whatever they'd call them, and they'd work for these ballet houses and do the background dancing for free.
Yeah.
And how are you supposed to compete from that if you have to eat?
Yeah.
It's insane to think about how people are getting screwed over, because they can't afford to do things for free, and they shouldn't have to, is the thing.
Yeah. Well, and that was, so I'm a college dropout, but I did like one semester of college, and it was fashion design and fashion merchandising. And that's one of my really distinct memories, is that there were people coming in and talking to us about internships. And most of them, like several of them, I remember there was one in particular that's standing out, but most of the people who were talking about their internships had done them unpaid. But this woman in particular had gone and done an internship in Italy with one of the big fashion houses. I forget what it was, but it was an unpaid internship, and she said it was like 40 hours a week, and then she had to, like, the housing wasn't covered, the travel wasn't covered, and it's like, you're talking about 10 grand plus out of pocket. Like, that's not even necessarily covered by scholarships. So I don't know,
Right.
like, how is that supposed to?
I mean, how do you even think you're gonna pay for something like that? That's just insane.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, unless you've got, well, and it's like I said before, it comes down to, unless, like, you're very, very fortunate, and for the people who are that fortunate, like, that's great, but that's not something that you should build an industry on, or your own business, relying on people who have a certain background who can work for free. And I think that's part of like the paradigm shift that we were talking about, for lack of a better phrase, is that in the way I see it in this new model, and this is all really relevant to me because I'm transitioning to more of like almost an agency style setup, but in this new model, the way I see it, and I know Amanda Farrow at Violet Minded has done some really interesting writing on this too that I'll link to in the post notes, but it's not working together because we have to or because it's necessary. It should be about working together and everybody living the situation better and doing it just like, because we like each other as people and like we want each other's businesses to succeed. And I really feel like that's the best, like that's the ideal situation.
Right. That would make things a lot easier, if we could all work with people that we like, and then we also have mutually beneficial relationships there, plus we all have our own business licenses, and so then you don't have to worry about the contract, and the other thing that even like I have issues keeping separated is like people will call and say, what's the difference between a vendor and a contractor? And it's like, oh god, it's like, let's not even start that conversation. It's so hard to separate that out.
Well, I know you have a course that's open for registration right now that covers some of this. So can you tell us a little bit more about it?
The course, we're going to start out, and the things that I think people have a lot of issues with is that the first week of the course is going to be time logging and learning what needs to be delegated, because a lot of people, I need an assistant, I can't do this all at once. But what do I give my assistant to do?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what can I let go of? And so the first week we'll be kind of edging that out and figuring out what the best things for someone to delegate is in their business. And that it's going to be kind of an intense kind of personal experience, because there's going to be some journaling and that different kind of things in the first week. And then we'll start talking about, once we know what we're doing, I'll talk about writing job ads. We'll talk about what kind of person you need to hire, whether you need a kind of one-off kind of flash in the pan vendor kind of thing, something you could get on Fiverr or something, or whether you actually need like a full-time virtual assistant or an employee. We'll talk about all that. We'll definitely spend some time talking more in depth about laws, making sure that if you are hiring contractors that you're legally compliant. And if you are hiring employees, then we'll have a section in there. This will be mostly videos for the employee section, because if you have employees, there's a lot of paperwork you have to file. You have to do the 941 quarterly tax returns, which are not hard. Everybody gets scared when I say that, 941 quarterly tax returns, and they're like, it's not hard. It's like a single sheet of paper. But you have to file it, and you have to file it on time. If you have employees and you have so many, you have to worry about workman's comp insurance. And if you have to, in certain states, if you have one employee, you have to offer them health insurance. Mm-hmm. And so we'll talk about those kind of things as well. And then we're going to in this section of the course, we're going to take a break for Christmas. And then we're going to come back, and like the first week of the year, we're going to start hiring. We're going to start implementing, posting job ads and doing interviews, because the other side we'll also be talking about interviews. And then the last week of the course, we're going to be talking about day-to-day management and follow-up, how to assign things in such a way that you get results, and how to automate. Say you assign something, you have to automate the return of it and tell yourself, okay, I need to follow up with them at certain points. Because it's really easy to send something to somebody and then 2 weeks later realize, oh crap, I really need that like right now. Where did it go, and where did we finish on it? So being organized in that, and so the day-to-day management, the project management of all that. And then, of course, I'm going to touch on the firing part, because that eventually will obviously happen for some people. They'll have to let somebody go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a great course, and I'm going to be in this round, and I'm really, really excited about it. And you can read more about it at, is it Invisible Office or The Invisible Office?
The Invisible Office.
Okay, so everybody can read more about that at theinvisibleoffice.com. She's got a Black Friday special going on, and I'll have some notes about that in the blog post too. And so that was Erica Cosminsky, and she's awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for listening and letting me talk about it.
No problem. Okay, cool. Thanks, Erica.